the title of the talk that I wanted to give is called Thinking Through Economic Security, and how we at SmolQuants are trying to think through it currently, why we think it's important, the framework that we use, and also at the end giving a couple of examples where, okay, things can go from more abstract to specific and how we're applying these things. So who am I? I'm a researcher and technical lead at SmolQuants. We're a new econ shop as of the last couple of months that just started up. So check us out on Twitter and check our GitHub out as well. Previously, I formulated the risk framework and the spec for a DeFi derivatives protocol. And then before that, I have a quant physics background from a prior life. So the question that I want to start out with is like, okay, who cares? Why really worry about economic security? Code security seems to be it, right? And I think the answer to that is definitely no, especially in DeFi. If you look at some of the bigger hacks, or quote unquote hacks, that have happened in the last 2 years, a lot of them are related to some form of economic manipulation. And I'll go into what I think economic manipulation actually means. But there was Avi with Mango Markets essentially just changing the price to exploit Mango. There was GMX with the AVAX price feed, just a couple of examples that have happened. For anybody that doesn't know, with GMX, basically somebody was just moving the price and effectively milking the LPs, when this actually wasn't like the market price, right? But this is what was being reported by the Oracle. There was, of course, Terra and the economics behind Terra and how that was designed, so more of a design type of issue. There was like Rari Fuse Oracle manipulation or market manipulation, where the stablecoin ended up pumping to like a price of infinity because a user, I think, and swapped through a couple hundred K on UniV3 and then exploited the Rari pool. There was Avi again with Aave and CRV trying to manipulate the price of CRV in order to effectively, quote unquote, make money. There was also inverse finance for another example of market manipulation, right? So I think like there's a lot of money at stake where users or attackers are trying to alter the behavior of the underlying protocol away from its intended behavior, right? But it's different than code security because it doesn't have anything to do with the code itself. It has to do with the economic mechanisms and how you're protecting your protocol. So I think the question to ask is like, okay, how do we define economic security? What is economic security? And the way that I think about it is economic security is really concerned with two things. The first is, okay, how much capital, like economic capital, is it going to take to break your protocol? Everything at some level will break if you have like infinite amount of funds, right? It's just a question of like, okay, what's the limit, right? Like what's the minimum amount that's going to be required in order to make your protocol not behave as intended for all participants? And then the second is, okay, are all the economic mechanisms behind your protocol sound. I'll kind of go into what I think sound means, but by sound, I tend to think like, okay, in the like stable, steady state of the protocol, are people losing substantial amounts of money? Are they being properly compensated for the risk that they're taking by engaging with your protocol, or the risk that they're paying for? And also in the extreme scenarios where things are really going wrong, does the protocol end up losing like all the money? Or do LPs end up losing all of their money, basically? So, like I was saying before, economic security really, in my mind, differs from code security because economic security assumes the protocol has been programmed to perfection, and the only way to attack the protocol requires some form of upfront capital. So with that said, the way that I like to think about a framework that I like to use when thinking about economic security is kind of embodied in this meme. It really says it all to me. So if you don't know where the yield is coming from, you are the yield. In the sense that there's a reason why, for example, on like FTX, in the dying days of FTX, you could make an APY, I think it was like 50%, something like that, by lending stables. There's a reason you're getting paid 50%. The market is saying like there's an inherent risk to putting your stables on there. Probably 50% wasn't even enough, right? Because you lost all your money if you put your stables there in the end days of FTX. So the way that I like to think about this and why I think that meme is so great is it's really the first kind of pillar of the fundamental theory of asset pricing. It doesn't really apply in general, like entirely, but I think it's like good for thinking about how to audit and how to try and break your protocol, right? There's really no free lunch. Even if there is a free lunch, eventually somebody's going to take that free lunch, which is just the no arbitrage condition, right? So if your whatever yield farm is like yielding 1,000,000% APY in like the native token, there's a reason why it's doing that, right? Like the market is pricing the risk associated with like farming there. And then the second pillar is that I like to use when thinking about economic security is that assets can be replicated as portfolios of basic financial Legos. That it doesn't really apply entirely with DeFi because you don't have all the primitives that you want yet, but it's getting there. That when you're thinking about, okay, what is this token that I'm offering in my protocol? What, like, how do I think about like the risk associated with this token? Does it replicate the intended behavior that I want it to replicate? Rebuilding the payoff associated with that token via a select few financial primitives, right? Financial Legos. Usually that's like a stock, bond, and I can go into it where I think like the bond is in DeFi right now, but we'll get to that. So like, how do you apply this framework when thinking through like the soundness of your protocol or the protocol that you're auditing, the mechanisms, whether or not and how much it's going to cost to actually attack the protocol with a certain amount of capital? The first, when it comes to like there's no free lunch, is okay, who are the counterparties involved in your system? Who owes who what and when and for how long? Pretty much that, and mapping that out. Okay, I owe this person this at some point in the future. How much is that worth? That type of thing. Does your protocol trend toward no arbitrage and steady state of the system? I think Uniswap is a really good example of this. perturbing Uniswap in the sense of an arbitrage opportunity coming up where the price on Uniswap is different from the price somewhere else. The way like prices on Uniswap actually track prices external to the exchange is using arbitrage because there's an arb there. I can buy it on Uniswap, sell it somewhere else, and then the price, eventually that arb doesn't exist anymore, and now I go back to no arbitrage, right? And that happens really quickly. The third point is, okay, the obby trade, basically. Like, how much capital does it take to create a quote-unquote arbitrage in the obby sense on your protocol? Am I able to manipulate, is an attacker able to manipulate some of your protocol's dependencies using some amount of capital so that your protocol doesn't actually behave as it's supposed to behave, and you end up paying out a lot of money to that attacker? And then, like point two, what types of financial assets are involved in what your protocol is offering? Is it a stock, a bond, an option, a forward? Is it something a little bit more complex? Can we represent it as like a basket of other financial Legos? Is there a TradFi analog for the tokens that you're offering or the constituents that you're offering so we can model it better? Because a lot of the time, the answers to these questions, especially is your protocol sound, are probabilistic in nature and not deterministic. A lot of the, like, how much capital does it take to create an arbitrage types of questions are deterministic because of the nature of AMMs, which is really cool. But a lot of the, okay, what like risk parameters should I use when offering SHIB on Aave and people using SHIB to take out USDC loans? Like, how over collateralized should that be? That is a probabilistic question. And so thinking through, okay, how do we model the like risk of offering SHIB? Like, how many of these loans are going to get liquidated? How often? That type of thing. So a lot of that is pretty abstract. I figured we'd bring it to just our first audit, like SmolQuants' first audit, the Y2K audit that we just did, just to go over, okay, how we thought about first approaching this protocol and ways to possibly break it, if it could be broken, and the economic mechanisms behind it. So for those that don't really know, Y2K is a protocol for stablecoin and peg asset insurance on Arbitrum right now. The way that it works is for stablecoins like MIM, USDC, USDT, and I think they're doing STETH now. If the, take for example, MIM versus USD. If the price of MIM versus USD goes below a certain protocol set or governance set strike price, so say it's like $1 now and the strike is 97 cents. If it goes below 97 cents within the next week, the insurance buyer on the right-hand side gets paid out the collateral that the insurance buyer on the left-hand side gets paid out the collateral on the right-hand side the insurance seller deposited into the risk vault. The insurance buyer on the left-hand side always pays the premium to the insurance seller, right? So there's this question of, okay, how do you break this? If I have infinite amount of money, what can I do in order to make it so that the protocol doesn't behave as intended, right? And market manipulation is the first thing that should probably come to mind. The easiest way to do it would be, okay, this relies on an oracle, even if it's Chainlink Oracle, which it does rely on Chainlink Oracle. Even if the oracle is completely robust, if the oracle is querying a market that's super illiquid and the attacker has a lot of capital and can move the market price itself so that the actual price of the asset is below 97 cents, Chainlink is going to report that, right? Because it's the actual market price. And so how much does it take to actually get it below 97 cents? So that was the first thing that we did for them. And we chose MIM because it was the most illiquid of all the stablecoin options. And even more concerning was that MIM, all of the liquidity for MIM at the time of audit, which was in the beginning of December, and I would assume it's close to the same now, but I could be wrong. All of the liquidity is concentrated in one Curve meta pool. And so in the case of somebody selling a whole bunch of MIM into the pool to trigger a DPEG, there's no way for arbitrageurs really to come in and counteract that sell pressure, because in order to counteract the sell pressure as an arb where you quote unquote make free money would be you buy MIM on Curve and you sell it on like Uni or whatever. And you capture like 3 cents with that arb trade, right? But if there's no liquidity elsewhere, you can't do that. So all the sell pressure like really doesn't get counteracted unless you have some sort of natural buy pressure. And somebody who's buying is willing to take the risk that like, okay, they have to hold on to it and eventually the price will recover from other people buying and they can sell it. So the first thing an attacker could do is you purchase the Y2K insurance on the MIM-USD market. So you're the insurance buyer on the left-hand side. Then you intentionally try to trigger a DPEG, right? And you can do this by going to Abracadabra with their CDP type mechanism. You mint MIM with some amount of upfront collateral to generate the MIM. You take that MIM, you sell it into the Curve pool to trigger a DPEG, and you probably have to wait a little bit for the Chainlink Oracle to relay that through. You then collect on Y2K because the DPEG actually happened. So you collect all the collateral in the risk vault. Swap back the 3 Curve token that you got from the original MIM sell back into MIM, and you repay the MIM loan. So the P&L for this attack is the amount that you get paid out from the risk vault on Y2K minus the premiums that you had to pay in order to have the rights to all the collateral from the risk vault and the slippage on Curve in order to actually manipulate the market, right? And so part of the work that we did for them is, okay, like the current price for MIM is this. How much does it take to actually, how much MIM do you have to sell into the pool in order to get to your strike price? Where the profitability of the attack is break even. So you just make 0 P&L by executing the attack. And that would require in December about 47 mint from the Abracadabra. But for a lot of these market manipulation kind of attacks, the best way to mitigate it, and this is part of our suggestion, is really cap the upside for the attacker. So in this case, the P&L is, the upside is completely dependent on the payout from the risk vaults, right? And so if you limit and you cap based on liquidity for MIM, how much an insurance seller can actually put into the risk vault, you can make you can make sure that the profitability of this attack is always less than 0, right? And so there's no reason for unless they just want to light everything on fire, it's still better than not doing anything. There's really, like, the attacker won't make money, right? The other side to the audit was related to like the economic mechanisms behind the protocol. Is it designed such that it's replicating the product that it's supposed to be replicating, right? And so if you look at this diagram for the Y2K white paper, insurance on pegged assets, where the insurance pays out based off of an event happening, is really analogous to a binary put option. So are the ways that Y2K is pricing effectively this insurance in line with what you would expect for a binary option market, right? Or binary put option market. In V1, they're improving on this for V2, so this is old at this point. But in V1, there's a pro rata payout structure where all the insurance buyers on the right-hand side, if they get paid out, they take a pro rata share of whatever collateral Y ended up getting paid over, where pro rata is based off of their share of premiums deposited in the insurance vault. So if there are 10 people that deposited premiums, my payout of collateral Y is just my X value divided by the sum over all 10 in the vault times Y, right? So does that are there any issues from an economic perspective of essentially doing a pro rata payout that way? And so the way to really kind of stress test that usually is through extreme examples, right? So if you take the two-player extreme example, ignoring fees, it doesn't look that great for sellers, at least in the extreme example, right? So if a seller deposits 1,000 ETH in the risk vault from him, and a buyer deposits literally just dust in the hedge vault, and no other buyers come in, so it's the extreme example, and a depeg occurs, the buyer receives all 1,000 ETH, and the seller receives just the dust. So the premium effectively paid was zero, or close to zero. And part of what this example, or just really simple example, illustrates is that, okay, the first binary put buyer is really able to specify their own price by depositing whatever amount they want, as long as some sellers are on the other side, right? That means that, like, effectively the sellers are quoting the price for the binary put option at a price of zero, which they probably don't intend to be doing. The way we suggested to get around this would be, okay, doing something similar to Squeeze, where the act of minting and generating the binary put option token is separated from the act of actually making a market for it and providing liquidity for it. And then when you mint the token, couple it with ETH, for example, and then provide liquidity for it on a hypothetical Y2K binary option AMM, the first option seller that's providing liquidity would decide what they think the fair price is, kind of like you can do with Uniswap, and then let the market decide from there, right? And that first seller is the one that actually takes the hit if the market thinks that the price is completely different than what they think the price is, right? But in practice, from like the product market fit that Y2K has right now, and how things are looking just from Dune, the steady state for the system seems to be pricing close to the market's expectations for the probability of a depeg, which is good, which is what you want for a binary option, right? The other example of, okay, how do you apply this abstract stuff to something more concrete would be some of the work I was personally doing with Spearbit pre-merge. And that was when Aave was listing staked ETH, and there were a whole bunch of leverage positions on staked ETH, using staked ETH as collateral on Aave. And we wanted to know, okay, like what happens in the event that the price of staked ETH collapses relative to ETH? Does the Aave Insurance Fund, like how much should we expect the Aave Insurance Fund to lose? What's the probability of the STE's price going below like the first kind of giant candle here, where you had a whole bunch of degens taking out loans and triggers a liquidation cascade? And those types of questions bring it back to like, okay, what are the risk parameters that you want to be setting for this type of collateral? STETH is a less extreme case. Something like SHIB would be a more extreme case where it's like, okay, do you even want to offer this collateral? Because at the end of the day, are you going to completely deplete the insurance fund in the event that SHIB goes to like either goes to infinity or zero in a short amount of time? For staked ETH, because we didn't finish this analysis, but I still think it's super interesting. For staked ETH, a good way to start would be to say, because this is more of like a probabilistic question, and you want to be thinking in terms of, okay, like what's a good quant finance model in order to understand what the probability might be. A good way to start might be to say, okay, staked ETH looks analogous to like zero coupon bond, and you can read. There's a really good blog post by Monette Supply on this that goes into it, but kind of looks like a bond where the interest rate is the ETH staking rate. Pre-withdrawals, there's an implicit ceiling of 1 ETH on the price. Is there a really good TradFi model that already exists for bonds that we can kind of apply in order to model STETH and get a sense for, okay, roughly what might the probability be that at some point in the future price goes below like 92 cents? What is that probability? And then at the same time, in the most extreme cases, like the 5% most extreme cases, what's the expected loss to the insurance fund because of all that bad debt, right? So the approach was, okay, take ETH staking rate to be the interest rate stochastic process, find a good bond model or like a simple bond model that also assumes interest rates are greater than zero because you have that implicit ceiling of 1. Fit the process via historical data, and then use the model fit to with existing STETH collateral amount to calculate the expected loss in the worst X% of price pass scenarios. So you have a whole bunch of simulations, or you can do it just math-wise, for hypothetical paths in the future for where the price might go. How much does Aave lose in the worst X% of price paths? So just wanted to comment on where we see all of this going, especially given how much money has been lost due to economic attacks. I really think that, and at SmolQuants, we think that protocol devs are going to start using more open source risk tools that are built, I think this is key, they're built into their dev frameworks to do their own pre-audit economic analyses. So like even before getting an audit, you're thinking really in depth into, okay, how do I break like my protocol with a certain amount of capital? And if I use this model, what's the probability that my LPs lose all their money, pretty much? Also, in the future, coupled with economic audits becoming a standard part of the audit process. I firmly believe this too, because the code audit process is different than the economic audit process, right? But the economic audit process is still super valuable because at the end of the day, once you launch, if you're like Mango Markets or whatever, and you lose 100 mil, you're still losing 100 mil. But all these things are really why we're trying to build open source tools that make it easier to analyze the risk associated with your protocol, right? So the first would be Ape Risk, which is an ApeWorks plugin that makes it super easy to do effectively Monte Carlo simulations. There are hypothesis strategies that you can use in your tests or elsewhere outside of tests that allow you to take either historical data or specify model parameters. In the historical data case, the hypothesis strategy fits the model that you're choosing for the like price path to historical data, and then generates a whole bunch of simulations that you can then test against over here on the right-hand side. And you don't have to think about like any of the math. All the math is really abstracted away, although you should be careful because you're like making assumptions with what model you choose. But the goal is like, okay, don't have to think about the math too much, but give me a set of price paths so that I can inject those into my protocol in some way or into my contracts and see how my protocol behaves, right? In a million scenarios. And then backtest ape is more for DeFi strategies, but it's becoming more general where it's like generalized backtesting. It uses, it will be using ape risk, but it's very much, okay, these are my protocol contracts. I want to go back in time to like a year ago, 2 years ago, before I launched my protocol, and see what would happen to LPs in my protocol if this dependency behaved in the way that it did a year ago, 2 years ago. So that's it in terms of what I wanted to talk about. Thank you. And I just left some time for Q&A. So every protocol incorporates their native token, which are often the most vulnerable, like Mango and XVS and Venus. How do you balance native token utility with economic security? I think that like it depends on each protocol, obviously, but the like big thing when thinking about the protocol would be to just take it to the extremes and see what happens in the most extreme scenario and how much the protocol relies on the token when everything is going wrong, right? Because the value of the token is going to go down when everything is going wrong too. And thinking through that, if that answers your question. How do you see the role of legal frameworks and regulatory oversight in ensuring economic security in the crypto space? What are the potential challenges and benefits of such oversight? I'm kind of extreme with this question where I don't think that I just think it's a terrible idea to design your protocol relying in a worst case scenario on regulatory or legal. Like the whole point to me in DeFi is making something that is super robust to any actor participating in whatever way. So relying on regulatory or legal to come in and protect you against an actor that doesn't have the best intentions, that doesn't really make sense to me. I think you should be designing assuming that people are going to be attacking whatever it is you're putting out there. How do economic models and game theory inform the design of incentives in crypto, and how do those incentives impact economic security? I feel like this is close to related to the first question of every protocol incorporates their native token. I think it's like case specific, right? An example off the top of my head might be like, okay, like Rye as a protocol is completely different than GMX. So again, I think it depends on like what exactly your protocol does, what does your token do, like, or the tokens associated with your protocol, and like how are you using those tokens, and back to the extreme scenario of like if everything goes wrong, what happens, right? Do like people lose all their money? What is your view on the relationship between economic security and decentralization in the crypto space, and how can those two principles be balanced? Kind of feels a little bit related, or at least my viewpoint on this seems a little bit related to the legal question. Like I tend to be more decentralization maxi, but I know that like is a little bit complicated when you're talking about things that have like risk parameters, right? But I tend to be more biased to the probably like having gone through fire, more biased to the have as few governance parameters as possible, try and be as decentralized as possible, and make sure whatever simple mechanisms you have in place are super robust to the most extreme scenarios, right? If someone with no prior experience with economic analysis wanted to get started, what is the lowest hanging fruit for an exercise to do? That's a good question. I think the best one, and actually the one with most like value, would be particularly UniV2 or like a deterministic slippage curve. The Oracle or the market manipulation attack, because it's really just algebra, right? Because these price curves, especially with UniV2 and curve, are deterministic in nature. Just calculate like how much does it take to move the market, and then like from that, it really gives info into like mitigating a whole bunch of potential economic attacks that could happen on protocols that are derivatives of that underlying protocol of like Uniswap. What other financial primitives you see coming into the space, and how should we prepare to analyze them? Staked ETH is the coolest for me, even though it's already in the space, and LSDs, because it doesn't look like a stock, it looks like a bond, and so a lot of the math that you've really seen in DeFi, like with multivariate geometric Brownian motion, you're not going to be using, and so we can start using other financial math. So that's pretty cool. But like, I still think derivatives protocols are just starting, and I'm really excited by those, and understanding whether those behave as intended, right? Like options protocols, futures protocols, that type of thing. Permissionless options and futures protocols. How valuable do you think more formalized game theoretic analyses are with respect to protocol security? I, to be honest, don't have as much experience in the game theoretic analyses as other people in the space, more coming from the quant finance background and perspective, but I would guess very valuable, right? Can ChatGPT do economic analysis? Interesting. I feel like that's similar to the question of like, can ChatGPT do math or like super complex math, or like at what point? Yeah, yeah. At what point do humans become inferior to like the robots? I don't know. I don't think so with ChatGPT, but that is a cool question. Okay, so a more general question: to what degree are we able to show economic safety using tooling and analysis, given the messy and adversarial nature of the world? I think it depends on the. I think it depends on which attack that you're talking about, right? Like, so the market manipulation attack, especially when the market that you're manipulating is super illiquid, it's like concentrated in one pool, and the pool itself has like a deterministic price curve or slippage curve, not like UniV3 where like the slippage changes and it's like it's harder to calculate, but more UniV2 curve. I think you can go a really long way in terms of like designing mechanisms that your protocol can implement, usually caps that make it so that like that attack is never profitable or almost never profitable, right? The like disclaimer there is usually it depends on how much liquidity is in the underlying pool and having some form of liquidity oracle for your protocol to query. But in the cases of like an Aave or a Maker, it's definitely way harder because most of the quant finance models that are used are just wrong, right? Like they're empirically wrong. So whatever probability you're getting out is probably not the actual probability. And you should err on the like way safer conservative side. Do you have examples of tools for economic analysis that you think are missing, underexplored? Yes, Ape Risk. Ape Notebook is really good for Jupyter notebooks. And feel free, please. Ape Risk is open source, so feel free to contribute if you want. We're just really starting with it, but the goal, like I was saying, is to make it so that in like Ape or Foundry or whatever DApp framework you're using, there are plugins that make it easier to analyze whatever like risk you're taking on with your protocol and the mechanisms that you're designing. Do we really need these tools when already real-world economic scenarios-based tools are there? Yeah, I don't know. I felt like these tools were definitely needed because it like nothing plugs into Ape or Foundry or whatever DApp framework you're using, right? Like to me, it should be as simple as one line of code in your tests, and then all of a sudden you're testing the economic mechanisms, right? And you're getting a whole bunch of, for example, Monte Carlo simulations for possible price paths and seeing how much LPs are losing, and maybe tuning your risk parameters better so that like they're being properly compensated for the risk that they're taking on by LPing in your protocol. Someone else is typing. What tools would I like to see being built for this purpose? Yeah, I feel like that's similar to the prior question. How robust do you foresee the need of these analysis tools being? Yeah, that's a hard question. Especially on like the Monte Carlo sim side, and anytime you're doing like a model, right? Do you mean robust in the sense of in what sense? With um, so the way that we've been doing it with ape risk and backtest ape is pretty manual, where like we'll fork the exposure in a large quantity of tunable. Yeah, I think like part of the reservation that I would have as well, especially with a large quantity of tunable parameters, is like you can kind of get any answer you want, or close to a lot of answers, right? So that's why I like to trend towards having fewer parameters. Um, just getting back to what I was saying previously, what like with backtest ape, what we've been trying to do is um, like essentially fork the underlying contracts and add different like setters to those contracts so that you can modify the state in whatever way you want when you're backtesting. Differential testing with the UEM, I think, is a good bet. I actually don't really know too much about differential testing. So, yeah, I would love to hear more about differential testing. I know Foundry has that. I actually don't know if Ape has a plugin for differential testing. Quite interested in being able to make statements about safe range. So I think, like, for a lot of the risk parameter stuff, uh, you have to be careful because, okay, saying something is safe, usually, especially with the probabilistic stuff, is model dependent. And so it could be safe for one model and then for another model be completely unsafe, right? Like the standard example is like you're assuming geometric Brownian motion, but the underlying price process actually has like heavier tails, longer tails. So like whatever ranges or whatever risk parameters you're giving, whatever ranges on those risk parameters you're giving, I would just make sure, one, to have a disclaimer for the model itself, and two, test against multiple different models. How important do you think it is to simulate DeFi protocols on the EVM versus? I actually prefer to do the simulation on the EVM, but part of that is I enjoy Solidity, and so I like writing as much as I can in Solidity. Also, it's maybe there's something different between the Python test, but between the Python model and your Solidity code, right? So I just think it's probably a better approach, or the approach that we're trying to take with Ape Risk to test directly against your smart contracts. Have you looked into symbolic exploration? No, I have not, but that sounds super interesting. So would love to chat about symbolic exploration via DMs or learn more. Regarding the Y2K case, wouldn't the cost be much higher than 47 mil considering exchange liquidity and vault owners closing their debt position? Yeah, but I would rather be conservative with whatever number is being put out, and particularly on market manipulation, so that like the cap that you end up using is super. I know there's a balance, right, between your protocol like doing what it's intended to do and having as much capital as possible in your protocol with like risk. But in this case, I still think it's better to be more conservative on the extreme side
so that with the market manipulation attacks, you completely eliminate, or at least the number that you give for how much to cap, completely eliminates the profitability of the attack, right? And then Y2K and protocols can decide what they want to do with that. Feel free to DM me, and we'd love to chat more.